I actually found that you only really need like 0.1 Bitcoin to become a part of this new millionaire class on a Bitcoin standard if we do assume that we have this Pareto's principle distribution. Let's assume there's 4 million Bitcoin available for sale. When you run that calculation, you find out you only need 0.015 Bitcoin to become a part of the new millionaire class. So there's only going to be 80 million people in the world who will be able to get their hands on 0.015 Bitcoin. That's about $700 today. Yeah, so I think Microstrategy has discovered the infinite money glitch, and I do think Microstrategy could be worth over $35,000 per share. Microstrategy could be worth $1 trillion. Microstrategy could overtake Apple and Microsoft. Okay? It is a genuine possibility, and Michael Saylor could be the world's richest man.
Luke Mikic is a prominent Bitcoin content creator, managing key YouTube channels like Bitcoin News and his personal channel where he provides in-depth Bitcoin analysis. As a full-time digital nomad living on a Bitcoin standard, he explored over 50 cities in the past 2 years and documents his journey on his third channel, The Australian Escape Artist.
Okay, all of a sudden being a millionaire doesn't mean anything. Like, if you've got $1 million in Australia, you can't even buy the average size home. We have the big money, nation states, pension funds, corporations. We have billionaires, millionaires. They're all FOMOing into Bitcoin today.
Mr. Luke Mikic, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. How are you, sir?
I'm excited to get into it, my friend. How are you?
Good, good. You are a man of many skills and have, we were joking offline, we can go, you could go for hours. We could, tee up and you just go for hours. So we're talking about some things offline here we're talking a handful of things. Some of them, power laws. We were talking about Giovanni and the power laws. We were talking about what you might be able to retire on, what amount of Bitcoin you might be able to retire on, and just using some of these power laws and some of these different models, and what median price homes or even big homes, what they might be worth in Bitcoin terms someday. I think these are things that people need to start getting their mind around and their head around. We're going to touch on $64 million Bitcoin as well, so we'll kind of leave that for as people watch this episode, just kind of a little cliffhanger here. So you get some incredible stuff here, but I would love for you to kind of touch on what really any of those things, but what's really on your mind right now and what you've been really pouring a lot of time into right now.
Yeah, for me, it's looking at how much Bitcoin you actually need to retire. I've given a lot of thought, and right now in the fiat world, it's getting exponentially more expensive to be able to retire in fiat world. Okay, all of a sudden being a millionaire doesn't mean anything. Like, if you've got $1 million in Australia, you can't even buy the average size home. Like in Sydney, it costs $1.5 million to buy a home in Sydney. So a lot of people are naturally thinking, how can I get ahead? How can I get out of this 9-to-5 rat race? And this kind of sent me down a rabbit hole looking at, okay, again, in a hypothetical world, again, let's assume Bitcoin takes over. How much Bitcoin do you actually need to get rich? And how achievable is it? Because everybody can feel it. Like everybody who's in the lower class or the middle class or even the upper class, they're really struggling to be able to retire. Okay, we are, suffering from that 10% loss of purchasing power of our money every single year. And it feels like that magic number that we need to retire in fiat land continues to run away from us. It was $500,000 a decade ago. Now it's $1 million. And in a decade's time, you might need $2 million to retire. Whereas I think if you look at the Bitcoin land, things are a little bit different. And that's because there's only 21 million Bitcoin available, and nobody will ever be able to increase that number of Bitcoin. So what I wanted to look at was I wanted to assume, okay, what if we see a Pareto's principle distribution happen onto a Bitcoin standard? And all of Pareto's principles distribution is it's the classic 80-20. So you hear people say, typically the 20% of the richest people in society control 80% of the resources. And this is a distribution that you can see in lots of different disciplines, not just wealth. We might talk about those later if it's of interest. But I said, okay, let's assume we see this Pareto's principle distribution. How much Bitcoin do you need to become, a new part of this millionaire class? So we know today there's somewhere around 50 to 60 million millionaires. So I looked at this Pareto's Principles distribution on a Bitcoin standard, and I was pleasantly surprised at how little Bitcoin you actually need to become a part of the the new 1% or the new millionaire class or the new billionaire class. Okay, so when you run the numbers and you say, okay, hang on a minute, there is only 16 million Bitcoin actually available for sale. Okay, we do know that 4 to 5 million Bitcoin are lost. You can get to some pretty wonky numbers. Like, for example, I actually found that you only really need like 0.1 Bitcoin to become a part of this new millionaire class on a Bitcoin standard if we do assume that we have this Pareto's Principle distribution. But things get even more bullish and things get even more wonky when you actually consider or you entertain an even more bullish hypothetical thought experiment. And that is, hang on a minute, out of those 16 million Bitcoin that, actually do circulate, how many of those will be available for sale in the future when the other 99% of the world wants to buy some Bitcoin? Because we do know today only around 1% of the world actually holds Bitcoin on chain in their own self-custody. So again, this is another question, how much Bitcoin is going to be available in the future? Well, again, I ran a second assumption. More bullish, I understand that. So again, run your own numbers. If you don't believe my numbers, go run your own. But I said, all right, let's assume only 4 million Bitcoin are actually available for sale. Sounds crazy, but I mean, right now there's only 2 million Bitcoin sitting on exchanges. There's only 3 million Bitcoin that circulate regularly and go onto and off to the exchanges on a relatively regular fashion. Let's assume there's 4 million Bitcoin available for sale. And when you run that calculation, assuming a Pareto's Principle distribution on a Bitcoin standard, you find out you only need 0.015 Bitcoin to become a part of the new millionaire class. So there's only going to be 80 million people in the world who will be able to get their hands on 0.015 Bitcoin. And that is absolutely nuts because that is not a lot of money. That's about 700 US dollars today. Okay. So again, 0.1 Bitcoin today, that's about $7,000, and 0.01 Bitcoin, 1% of a Bitcoin, that could get you into the new millionaire class. It's only about $700 today, which is just crazy when you really think about it. So that's kind of how I think about, this whole topic of retiring on Bitcoin. I think if you can become a part of a very select and rare individuals, like only 80 million people on the planet Earth could accumulate that 0.01 Bitcoin, I'm assuming that's going to be enough Bitcoin to retire on in the future.
I love that. What you talked about, run your own numbers and, do your own research, which is obviously a big ethos inside of the Bitcoin world. What are some models or power laws? Well, we can get to the power laws in a minute, but what are some models? Are you using Saylor's Bitcoin 2024 models? Are you using the Nakamoto portfolio? What do you use, like the actual tools that you're using to model some of these? Or do you have some of your own things that you've been using or you kind of created?
I look at them all. I love the Nakamoto portfolio from Swan. That's really cool. I have played around with Saylor's most recent calculator as well, Bitcoin 2024, I think he calls it, or something weird like that. I'm actually going to do a video on that. I actually most like When Moon. It is a plugin that you can use. I believe an Australian created it. I'll get the link for it and put it down below in the show notes for you guys. But it's a little bit of a calculator where you can plug in how much Bitcoin you own, how much Bitcoin you want to spend each year to reach your retirement. Again, I love these assumptions because, again, retirement means different things for different people. And then this calculator also says, okay, how much do you think Bitcoin's going to appreciate by in the future? You can plug in your own CAGR, whether you want to be conservative and say 20%, or you want to be more bullish like me and say 50 or 100%. And you can also plug in an assumption for the debasement of fiat currency. So I love this website because you can literally run your own maths. I believe it's called When Moon. And I play around with this calculator a lot and you get some pretty similar numbers. Like you can retire on 0.1 Bitcoin a lot quicker than most people think. Okay. And that is simply because, Bitcoin is so rare. It's so scarce. And we do know that fiat currency is going to continue to be debased into the future. So again, I did a video on that recently. And even with like 0.1 Bitcoin, I believe you can retire pretty comfortably by something like 2028 from memory. I did that video a couple of months ago now, but I think it's like that's pretty soon. Retiring on 0.1 Bitcoin. It's only a $7,000 investment. But again, people don't think, what's Bitcoin going to do in the next 4 to 5 years between now and 2028? That's 2 cycles time. We just had a halving in 2025. We're in the early stages of what I think is a bull run. Then we have another halving in 2028. We should get another couple of positive years then. And people just aren't thinking in that exponential fashion because they're thinking in these linear fashions. They're thinking, oh, Bitcoin sees diminishing returns every cycle. Bitcoin's becoming less volatile and the returns we're getting are less and less and less. And I just don't think that's going to hold true for very long. Okay, again, people are, they're writing essays on the fact that we have 4 data points. And they believe that the 4 data points we've seen previously will actually hold true into the future. They're saying, let's extrapolate the first 15 years of Bitcoin data into the next 15 years. And they're just missing the fundamental problem with doing that. Okay, in the first 15 years, less than 1% of the world bought Bitcoin. And in the first 15 years, you saw a rising amount of supply available for sale. Bitcoins were being mined, they were being dumped onto the market. 19.5 million coins are being mined. And the big money wasn't interested in Bitcoin for the first 11 or 12 years of Bitcoin's life. I believe they have been since 2021. But again, I think in the next 15 years, we have a fundamentally different macroeconomic environment for Bitcoin. We're going to have decreasing supply. There's going to be less than 1 million coins mined over the next 15 years. And we're going to see serious demand from more than 1% of the world, okay? We have the big money, nation states, pension funds, corporations. We have billionaires, millionaires. They're all FOMOing into Bitcoin today, okay? And we didn't have that before 2021. So I think the whole idea of diminishing returns is going to be a fun one to watch break. I think that's how I'm thinking about it over the next few years.
Why are so many, in your opinion, you travel a lot, you see a lot of people, you talk to a lot of people, you see a lot of data yourself. I mean, why do you think that most people, because I agree with you, wholeheartedly. And there's the things I've looked at for years, you and I have talked about a lot of these things over time. Why do so many seemingly smart people, whether they are or aren't, there's a lot of smart people that don't see it. There's a lot of not smart people that don't see it either. And you can say that generally in the Bitcoin world too. There's smart people that do get Bitcoin. There's not smart people that understand Bitcoin actually, but there's very few people that really get Bitcoin and really see this change coming. And what is it to you, or maybe what are the characteristics of people that you're seeing that they either do or they don't get it? Because again, Wall Street greed is just kind of getting its hands into, it's taken 15 years. They're just kind of getting their hands into this. So you get a lot of people that are like, well, can you pay in Bitcoin? Can I buy things in Bitcoin? Like, why does the average person just not see what we're seeing?
And this isn't just a Bitcoin thing as well. So I don't want to go on a monologue here and say, oh, I'm so unique because I think I understand Bitcoin. Because I don't understand Bitcoin, to be quite frank. I've been looking at this thing, obsessing over this thing for 12 hours a day for 7 years. I still don't understand Bitcoin. So again, it's very complex to understand, but I do know what you mean. Like, again, to be a Bitcoiner and to have the courage to stick more than 80% of your net worth in this crazy volatile asset, it's pretty rare to find people who have done that. I think both of us are probably in that boat. And I think it is a very kind of unique kind of person that you do need to find, essentially, to be able to do that so early in Bitcoin. I think you need to be incredibly open-minded. You need to be able to admit that you're wrong. A lot of people really struggle with that. I think the sunk cost fallacy is a massive one. Admitting that you're a Bitcoiner or coming to the realization that you're hardcore all in Bitcoin, that's admitting that I've been living my life in a lie for my whole life. Okay? To admit, hang on a minute, holding a form of money that a government prints and a government creates, being okay with a government stealing 20 to 30 to 40 to 50% of my wealth every year and go and funding wars, to completely flip and say, hang on a minute, that's wrong. I've been paying taxes when I didn't need to be or shouldn't be, just to make that flip and become a Bitcoiner. It's incredibly difficult to do. And I think, obviously, the sunk cost fallacy explains a lot of it. Obviously, the older you are and the more time you spent in that system, the harder it could be to say, hang on a minute, this system is wrong. And me believing in this system, I've been wrong for 20, 30, 40, 50 years of my life. I think making that flip or that adjustment's a very difficult one. And then obviously I think there's a lot of cognitive biases. A lot of people have their life dependent on the fiat system. So to challenge the idea of governments and to challenge the ideas of all of these meaningless jobs that we are, working today, that could be confronting to some people because they think, hang on a minute, government is my safety. This system is my safety. It pays my bills. It keeps me running on this rat wheel. People don't think about the second order, or they don't think about things from first principles. And they don't think, hang on a minute, what's got me on the rat wheel? I'm running and I'm spinning and I'm trying to make all this money to pay my car debt, my home debt, my student debt. But they don't think, hang on a minute, why did I get into this problem in the first place? So there's a lot of questions there. I'd love your thoughts on this, Brandon. You're an incredibly deep thinker. What do you think distracts people the most when it comes to just not understanding Bitcoin? Because like you say, so many incredibly smart people just don't get it.
Yeah, I think you honestly nailed that's a lot of my thoughts too. It just comes down to lack of I don't know, critical thinking, but I come back to humility a lot. I think Bitcoin is generally a humility test. And like you said, the sunk cost fallacy, I think explains a lot of it. And it's just, you have to recognize your life has been a lie, largely your family's life, whatever, your children's life, your father's life, your mother's life. Like you have to make these bold claims and say, I'm sticking my flag in the ground and not a lot of people agree with me, but you have to have the courage to do that. And it's easier to go along with the herd, like you said, and government's got me, or just kind of blend in with the crowd. And a lot of people want that. They want to blend in with the crowd. They want to be part of the herd and not really make any waves, have no one really pointing at them saying, hey, they did it, they're the crazy one, whatever. That is tough, and we all have our levels of courage, I guess. And maybe that's not the best way to say it, but we have our levels of armor that we have, I guess. Everyone's different, and just withstanding that. So I think you said it so well. Sunk cost fallacy is a lot of it, until it becomes incredibly obvious and until there's really bad stuff happening, which, I don't know if we're really there yet. I don't think anyone can say, especially in America. Life isn't, people aren't fleeing like they were in Sri Lanka, and overrunning the palace, stuff like that. And the society's collapsing or whatever. So it's going to be fascinating in the coming years here. So yeah, it's something that I think we all think about though, constantly. So anyway, what do you think? We talked about retiring on Bitcoin and what amount that might be. What do you think in terms of, the median priced house? I know there's a meme recently of, I think Bitcoin Magazine put it out or whatever it was, but just showing the average house going down. Do you think people are really going to have to switch their mindset again of seeing the cost of things come down, that you might be earning less technically in Bitcoin, but everything in your life is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper? Instead of 600 Bitcoin for that awesome house you wanted, now it's 6 Bitcoin. What do you think when you go into terms of housing and things like that? How do you look at that?
Yes, and just quickly on the point we were discussing a moment ago, something I thought that was interesting was,
if you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, hey, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
The overlap of people who oppose the 2020 tyranny, it was an incredible overlap in the Bitcoin community. The percentage of people who said, I'm not okay with what's happening, the lockdowns and everything, it's pretty small, 5, maybe 10% of people around the world, maybe lower than that, were actually vocally and loudly saying to their friends, this is not okay. There were maybe 20 to 30% of people deep down saying, yeah, it's not okay. But how many people vocally were saying this is bullshit? pretty low, but the overlap in the Bitcoin community was massive. Maybe 90% of Bitcoiners were not a fan of that. I think that's interesting. There's a character trait there amongst those two types of people. There's definitely something there. And you got me thinking about that when you said, it's the people who have the courage amongst their friend group to say, or to stick out from the herd. That's what you said that got me thinking about that.
Did you see, before you go into this next thing here about, just housing and affordability there was someone had the other day a personality profile. It was 16 personalities, I think, or something, but it was about, and I didn't look at the source. I didn't look into it that much. I just remember seeing the picture of it, and it was showing the types of people, the types of personalities, 16 different personalities, the INFJ, whatever, people are familiar with that personality test, but Bitcoiners, largely were a couple of the different personality types compared, and it was like opposite of what most of society is. So to that point, and you just made me think of that. So it is very interesting when you start diving into the human psychology aspect of it.
I want you to send me that after the fact because I'd love to check it out. But something else I love checking out is the loss of purchasing power that property has against Bitcoin. Property has been trending again to zero against Bitcoin. And I think everybody's kind of fallen under this illusion or this spell thinking that property prices only go up, okay? And that's because you're measuring property prices in a currency that's constantly being debased. The number one chart I like to look at when it comes to property prices is actually looking at property prices priced in gold and not fiat. So what I've done, there's a really cool website that tracks the property prices of the major cities in Australia, whether that be Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. Again, in dollars, these things look parabolic. They're rising by 10% a year, sometimes more, 15% a year. But if you price them in gold, you can actually see properties down by like 30, 40, and 50% since 2008. And this is just largely because the debasement of the currency is going exponential and all of that money is looking for a safe place to go. So that's properties, okay? Again, and this is worldwide. This is not just Australia. This is happening in London, all your major property places all across America. Like you mentioned it, the price of property is getting exponentially cheaper. Only 4 or 5 years ago, the average property sold for about 60 Bitcoin. Now it's about 6 Bitcoin. So it's lost 90% of its purchasing power against Bitcoin in like 4 to 5 years. It's nuts. It's really, really nuts. And I think that trend's going to continue. And for me personally, this could be a good segue into another topic. But for me, the way I'm thinking about Bitcoin and where it should be valued and fairly valued, I won't think about selling any of my Bitcoin for a property until I can buy one of those Californian Malibu beach houses for, maybe 0.2 Bitcoin or something like that. I genuinely believe Bitcoin is going to be worth tens of millions of dollars in today's purchasing power, not hyperinflated dollars. A lot of people say, yeah, but Bitcoin at 10 million, it won't buy you anything. A loaf of bread will be $500. No, I'm not talking about hyperinflation. The maths that I've always run looking at Bitcoin's total addressable market cap or where it could be worth in the future, it assumes today's dollars, the $900 in the world today, and I always ignore the derivatives market. Let's not even talk about the $1 quadrillion of derivatives. Let's stay grounded. Let's be a little bit conservative, okay? And when you do run those maths and those numbers, I genuinely believe Bitcoin could be worth more than $50 million a coin. The exact number I've settled on is $64 million a coin. And today, that average size Malibu beach house on the coast front of California costs you around $10 million. So for me, when I think about property and Bitcoin, I want to be able to buy 6.4 Malibu beach houses for 1 Bitcoin. At that price, I'll consider selling a little bit of Bitcoin for property because that is where I think Bitcoin should be valued and where I think it is going to be valued a lot quicker than most people think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's exactly how I look at it too. It's funny. I look at people will ask like, when is hyper Bitcoinization coming? Things of that nature. And I always tell people that I'll know when hyper Bitcoinization is here, when the tenant is paying back in Bitcoin. That's when you'll know the business cycle is healed. We're in hyper Bitcoinization. That will be a glorious time. And that's exactly how I think about it as well. Like you just said, like it's thinking in terms of what do you're saving for a house. Like it's a savings technology, right? So you can actually save for a house instead of it just constantly running away from you. It's like, hey, we just keep saving, stacking stats. And then when a house gets, from 10 Bitcoin, a medium price house or a Malibu home, and now it's down to 1 Bitcoin or, 0.5 Bitcoin or 0.2, that's when I'll know, like, okay, cool. We've saved enough stats, and here we go. We're ready to buy our house or whatever. So I think it's, again, just reshaping your mind and reframing everything. It just helps so much the average person, whether you're working at McDonald's or whether you're a doctor or whatever it is, saving and stacking in sats and then having that as your savings technology, game changer, absolute game changer. So, comment on any of that, then I would love for you to go into kind of a segueing into the $64 million Bitcoin that we're kind of talking offline here about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest mental flip, thinking about your life priced in Bitcoin. That's the most difficult thing because it's so volatile. I always encourage people, don't look at the Bitcoin price unless it's on a 2 or 3 year time frame. And I don't know why, but people apply these rules to Bitcoin that they don't apply to dollars. Okay. People don't think in 2020, hang on a minute, the government just increased the money supply by 40%. My dollars, my savings just lost 40% of its value. I need to sell it instantly. This is how they think about Bitcoin. If Bitcoin crashes by 40%, they freak out because they don't understand what they hold, but they're like, oh, I need to dump my Bitcoin. It's just crashed by 40%. It's like, no. Zoom out a little bit, my friend. It's like we have these unfair rules, okay? People aren't looking at the purchasing power of their dollars in their bank account or their dollars in their retirement account on a 4-year time frame. If they did and actually analyzed it fairly, openly, and subjectively, they would say, oh, hang on a minute, I shouldn't be holding dollars. It is objectively a bad idea, okay? It is, just an incredibly bad idea because it just loses purchasing power. But I don't know why, but we don't think about Bitcoin in the same way. I think people who aren't all in on Bitcoin, they're not able to do that. But again, I think, like you say, I'd encourage people to start denominating your life in Bitcoin. And like we've illustrated today, home was about 60 Bitcoin a few years ago. Now it's 6. 90% cheaper when you save it in Bitcoin. So I think that's a big one. Now, the math of $64 million Bitcoin, all I did was I was incredibly conservative, I thought anyway. So I looked at all of the major asset classes around the world. You've got a $300 trillion real estate market. You've got a $200 trillion bond market. You've got $100 trillion of fiat currency. You add all those up, and I looked at them individually. This is back in 2021. I said, I think Bitcoin can grab 60% of the real estate market, half of the debt market, half of the fiat market. Again, we could maybe talk about timeframes later and why I think this happens really quickly. But I think, obviously, it's very easy to calculate the monetary premium in real estate. 50 to 60 years ago, before we left the gold standard, the average size home was costing somewhere around 3 times the average income. So if the average income was about 10K, the average size home was about 30K. Today, that multiple is not 3x, it's more like 10x in most major cities. And in places like Toronto and Sydney and LA, it's higher, it's 15x, okay? So that's how you calculate the monetary premium for the real estate market. But again, all I said was, okay, there's about $500 trillion that's in a defective store of value asset out of that 900 trillion. I said, let's just assume that, half of the world's money, 450 trillion, wants to flow into Bitcoin. I said, we apply the Bitcoin multiplier effect to this hypothetical demand for Bitcoin. This is something that everybody does wrong. They always forget about the multiplier effect. Okay, there's not 21 million Bitcoin available for sale. So again, not every $1 that flows into Bitcoin pushes the Bitcoin market cap up by 1x. Doesn't work like that. We have a multiplier effect. At the time when I wrote that article back in 2021, I used about a 3x multiplier effect. And when you run those numbers, 450 trillion times 3, that takes you to somewhere around $1.3 quadrillion market cap from memory. I think that's about right. Yeah, that's about right. $1.3 quadrillion dollars of market cap. Then you divide by 21 million and you work out getting about a $64 million price tag per Bitcoin in today's dollars, today's purchasing power. And again, I just like to remind people, since I wrote that article, that I got called crazy for by many people, mind you, the multiplier effect today is at 6x. It's not 3x. And this, again, was part of my thesis 3-4 years ago. I said, the multiplier effect is going to continue to rise. This supply suffocation that at the time we'd only seen for 18 months, I said this is going to continue and it's going to get more crazy. And eventually you're going to have no Bitcoin on exchanges. I got called crazy for that. I got called crazy for saying the multiplier effect will rise from here. It's at an all-time high today. It's at 6x. So, I mean, the things are going to get more wonky in the future. And I genuinely believe tens of millions of dollars of purchasing power per Bitcoin in today's dollars is wildly bearish. And things are going to get really bullish in the future here.
So someone was, you were speaking of timeframes, and I actually kind of want to quickly segue into that, because someone was, we dropped a video or a, interview with Joe Burnett. And one of the comments on there was, hey, I'm just so sick of influencers, people, peddling, it's going to skyrocket, price is going to skyrocket. And I was like, hey man, like you got to zoom out. Like 15 years ago, this thing didn't even have a price. Like, and now it's at $70,000, US dollars a coin. Oh, and then 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it was at 15,000. Like you'd over 4x your money. And it's like, you got to zoom out. And he's like, well, yeah, but since 2021, people just been saying it's going up and it's went sideways. So the moral of the story in a way is like perspective, number one, having a long-term outlook, perspective. But I would love for you to kind of touch on time frame, because I don't think any of us humans, like you already mentioned exponentiality once or twice already, a couple times so far, and none of us human beings can grasp exponentiality very easily. And what do you see in terms of, if me, like, I think millions it could be millions, like in the next 2 years, 4 years, it could be at millions. Like we just can't even grasp it. And that could it be at 100 or 200 a year from now? And that's it. Yeah. Or 50. Yeah. But it could also be at 2 million. So anyway, I would love your thoughts and just kind of what the time you put into thinking about this, because I just don't think people grasp. And we can talk about the reasons why you would want this, right? I mean, just the fact that it's the strongest money ever, but then the mining that's going to it, cleaning up the environment, all the things it's doing for society, the societal benefits of Bitcoin are so astounding. And no one really talks about that or knows about that in the mainstream. So I would love for you to kind of touch on this and how just the time frame of everything.
Yeah, so I'm probably more bullish than most people in the Bitcoin space, and I get accused of that a lot. Oh, you're just a hopium dealer, Luke. You just want to get rich. You just want to retire off your Bitcoin tomorrow. You're just trying to get influenced by talking about stupidly bullish numbers. And I hear all of those concerns, and I genuinely just don't agree with them. I am as incredibly bullish as I am, and I feel like I live my life in a way that backs up my opinions online. Because if Bitcoin goes to 5 million or 10 million really quickly, really rapidly, living in a Western country could be incredibly dangerous. We don't know how our governments are going to react to a $5 million Bitcoin or a $10 million Bitcoin. And me personally, I've already made the promise that I won't be living in a Western country when that happens. Because this transition, I believe, is going to happen really quickly and really dangerously. And I've been living on the road for 3 years now. People were shocked. Why don't you go live in Australia, Luke? Yes, the lockdowns were bad in 2020, but I mean, your government's nice now. I mean, they're nice again, right? Why don't you go back? And it's like, no, my friend. They've played their hand. They're very clear with their intentions. And when the next crisis happens, there will be a next crisis, they're going to be even more tyrannical. So again, like, I think Bitcoin's going to be incredibly bullish. I think it's going to happen incredibly quickly. And I already orient my life behind my beliefs. Okay. I genuinely believe it's going to be dangerous to live in a Western country when this shit shakes down. And just on the topic about influencers and, bullish price, predictions and things like that, I think the best thing you could do if you just wanted to gain clout online was to be a power law maximalist. Again, it's like the plan B stock to flow model all over again. Like, he showed very quickly, if you don't care, you just want to get 1 million followers, you just talk about power law, this new model, and just say it's math and science. Don't question the power law. Like, I mean, that's just, and I've been very vocally against a model that's predicting $1 million Bitcoin by 2033 from day one. Okay. I saw the comment that you got earlier today in your channel. I think if we were just talking about bullish numbers, I think we'd both be power law maximalists, but we're not. And I've been hated from day one for hating on the power law. So that's just a little bit on that topic. But how quickly could things happen? So the reason why I've got an accelerated time frame on how I think things are going to shake out is because I believe Bitcoin's a technology. Shocking, right? A lot of people, yes, Bitcoin's a technology. But people don't remember how technologies typically get adopted. They get adopted in S-curves. They get adopted in exponential fashions. So there's a really cool chart that I found about 3 years ago. And I talked about it in the same article I referenced earlier, talking about $64 million Bitcoin. I said, I actually think we could see that by 2031. I know, crazy. Better hear what my reasoning is for that. So if you look at the adoption curves of the internet, the automobile, and the smartphone, okay, you can take an average of those S curves and you see something really interesting. It took all of those three technologies around 10 years to go from 0% adoption to 10% adoption. And then you hit an inflection point. The technology begins to get network effects. It's beginning to go viral and mainstream. And all of a sudden, after that 10 to 12 years, it's not so foreign. It's not so alien. Most people have kind of seen or experienced this new technology in their life. And then this is when the masses FOMO. We see an inflection point, and then you see around the same amount of time. So it takes that technology 10 years to go from that 10% adoption to 90% adoption. Okay, this is how all technologies have been adopted, and it's been my thesis for 3 or 4 years now that I believe Bitcoin will be adopted in a similar fashion. I believe we're living through two eras of Bitcoin. I believe era number one was from 2008 to 2020. During that era, nobody knew what Bitcoin was. Nobody cared about Bitcoin. There was no need for Bitcoin, and I believe 2020 was that inflection point. All of a sudden, $10 trillion printed globally, authoritarian governments play their hand and locking down their citizens and, there's so many videos in Australia of like police getting masks and like shoving them on the face of their citizens for trying to walk on the beach during the day. It's just crazy, right? People were shocked. People were like, I need freedom. I need sovereignty. And I believe 2020 was the inflection point. So it's my thesis that it took about 12 years for era number one for Bitcoin to play out, 2008 to 2020. I believe by 2032, we'll be at the conclusion of era number two. Now, pinpointing an exact number of where Bitcoin adoption is, it's incredibly difficult. I've tried to run my own numbers because most people say, Luke, but to imply Bitcoin's at an inflection point and to imply that we're going to see 90% adoption by 2032, that means we need to see 10% adoption by 2020. We're nowhere near 10% adoption. And I agree, but it depends upon how you measure it, okay? If you're measuring it by people who are self-custodying Bitcoin on-chain, I would agree. I would say adoption is 0.1%, less than 1%. There's lots of good data. Blockware did a report in 2022, and they showed 0.37% adoption on-chain. I agree with that. If you measure it by people storing more than half of their net worth on Bitcoin on-chain, it's even lower. Adoption is 0.1%. If you measure it by people who have bought Bitcoin or crypto, shitcoins as well, and they hold it on-chain or on an exchange, I believe we've got about 600 million users around the world today. That puts you at about 8% adoption, which is interesting. Okay, so again, it's difficult to measure where Bitcoin is, but my thesis from day one has been that the masses don't actually matter. Because for us to get to that $64 million Bitcoin, what we're looking at is we are looking at a different S-curve. There's going to be multiple S-curves looking at how Bitcoin is being adopted. And when I talk about adoption, most people think about adoption and they think that adoption is hyper-Bitcoinization, all of the normies using Bitcoin to go pay for coffees and groceries. And that's cool, but I think that's the wrong way to measure adoption, okay? Because that doesn't matter. That's not going to impact the price. I believe we're going to see two S-curves. One's going to be a medium of exchange S-curve. So this is going to be how many of my normie friends are using Bitcoin to pay for a coffee and buy their groceries, and how many of my normies earn in Bitcoin and demand to be paid in Bitcoin. That's adoption curve number one, and I believe it's going to be slower. Adoption curve number two is the more interesting one, and this is going to happen much quicker than most people think. This is the monetization adoption curve of Bitcoin. This is the store of value adoption curve of Bitcoin. And this is going to be looking at how much of that $900 trillion of money in the world is being parked in Bitcoin. The people who control the majority of that $900 trillion of wealth, what are they doing with their Bitcoin? That's the more important adoption curve to be looking at. And I believe that is accelerating incredibly quickly. Okay, this adoption curve is not looking at what Uncle Joe or Aunt Jane is doing with her Bitcoin. It's looking at what Larry Fink, Michael Saylor, Bill Miller, Paul Tudor Jones, Stanley Druckenmiller, We're looking at what they're doing with their Bitcoin, because those are the people who matter. It's the sovereign wealth funds. It's the $500 billion Saudi Arabia sovereign wealth fund that's plowing billions of dollars into Bitcoin. Those are the people who matter. It's the nation states. It's the asset managers that control $50 trillion of assets around the world. It's the it's the 15,000 hedge funds that control $5 trillion of money. What's the adoption curve? What's the adoption rate of Bitcoin amongst the $5 trillion hedge fund market? It's 47%. I did a video recently on a report that showed that 47% of hedge funds own Bitcoin. And of the top 25 hedge funds in the world, 16 of them own Bitcoin. What's the adoption rate? 60%. So again, I believe, and again, let's talk more numbers. I love numbers. Of the top 10 sovereign wealth funds around the world, like 7 of them own Bitcoin. And you know that the hardest thing to do is to admit you're wrong and to go from a 0 to 1% allocation. I mention that because a lot of people will say, oh, okay, Luke, that's true. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all of these multi-$100 billion banks, okay, they own Bitcoin, but they only own a little bit. And my biggest rebuttal to that is that going from 0 to 1% allocation is far more difficult than going from a 1% allocation to a 50% allocation for Bitcoin. Because getting off 0 is the hardest thing to do. Once you get a little bit of Bitcoin exposure and Bitcoin continues to monetize, again, hypothetical assumption, Bitcoin could go to 0. It's a possibility. Nothing's a certainty in life. Bitcoin could fail. Just sidebar, I do think it's more likely that Bitcoin fails and goes to 0 than it just becoming digital gold and just being worth 500K a coin and $1 million a coin, like many people think it's going to be. But anyway, once Bitcoin does continue to monetize, hypothetically, those people who have a 1% allocation to Bitcoin, they're going to increase their allocation to Bitcoin. Okay, so I think these are the people we need to be watching. 6 out of the 10 largest sovereign wealth funds own Bitcoin. That's a 60% adoption rate. Over 60% of the 47% of the 15,000 hedge funds own Bitcoin. 47% adoption rate in a $5 trillion market. Okay, these are the markets we need to be watching. These are the people who matter, and these are the people who are going to send Bitcoin to tens of millions of dollars a coin much quicker than most people think. So I've been talking about adoption for about 10 or 15 minutes here. I've probably got slightly derailed, Brandon. Feel free to reel me back in.
No, this is brilliant. It's brilliant stuff. It makes me think of, like, we were talking about the power laws, and going back and forth on that. We were in the power law. That makes me think of Metcalfe's law, obviously Reed's law, which Reed's law doesn't get talked about very much, but I believe Reed's law is the inside of Metcalfe's law. It's the grouping of networks on top of networks. And that's where, that was what Bitcoin is and what it's doing and it's about to do over the next 10, 20 years, like you just kind of laid out. So people can go dive into those things and research them. And that's what, and honestly, the log chart, the Metcalfe's law, just in and of itself, the network effect is one of the things that really orange pilled me. Storing wealth in your head and then seeing the log chart of Bitcoin 6-7 years ago were two of the things that really woke me up to Bitcoin. It was like, whoa, like some huge orange pill moments. And 2020 was, lockdowns are probably the third one, like the trifecta, but those two things years and years ago, really. So I really, if people aren't fully grasping Bitcoin, I would go check out the log chart. It's not some like linear thing. You kind of touched on this earlier, which made me think of it. When the prices are going up and down on a linear chart, it looks very confusing and it's like, well, it's going to crash. It's going to go up. But when you see the log chart and the adoption of the network and the hash rate and the actual fundamentals of the network just continually growing basically every day, in essence, it's undeniable. So, go check those out. It's really, so touch on any of that if you want, but also like your channel, like, what you do, you're in control of a lot of different, media assets, and you do have some of the best really info out there, and not that it's hard hitting necessarily, but put bold claims out there, hard hitting in a way, I guess, depending on who you are, but and your perspective. But you have a lot of things that I just don't see anywhere else. Like, where do you get your information from? Like, where are you scouring that the average person on Bitcoin Twitter isn't even scouting? I just don't see, like a lot of it gets like redundant on Twitter, but you always come up and find things that I'm just like, wow, I didn't see that anywhere. So where are you finding stuff?
You're just buttering me up now, mate. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you. It's true. I appreciate that. I try to make unique content. Like Alex Hormozy says that he's never going to make a video that somebody else can make. Like you got to make a one-of-one video. So I do think about that a lot before I make a video. Like
So good.
I do a lot of news-based videos, but I always try to put a unique spin on them and look at things differently from most people do. So that's kind of something I think about before I make any video. I say, okay, I'm not just going to make another video that anyone can make. How do I make this different? How do I give someone some value that they haven't seen from this headline? So that's something I always think about personally. Now, what do I do? I mean, I've been thinking and obsessing about this Bitcoin thing for 7 years now. Like I left university in 2017 and started a personal training business with the sole goal of just listening to Bitcoin podcasts and reading Bitcoin books. I still probably try to read maybe somewhere between like 20, 30, maybe 40 books a year, audio books. So yes, I'm cheating. Some people will say, but you're not reading, Luke. That's true. I might only read 5 physical books a year and the majority of those are audio books, but I'm just fascinated. I just like learning things. I'm just always constantly trying to learn things, and traveling to new places gives you new perspectives and experiences as well. So sometimes that really helps. I'll constantly come up with my best ideas just by traveling. Like I see something somewhere else. I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. That completely changes how I think about X. I suppose I feel like maybe that's unique on Bitcoin Twitter, and even people who make videos. I think a lot of people just don't move around a lot. That could be it. What do you think? Where do you find sources of inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I don't travel nearly as much as you do, so I know that's part of it. You mean travel a lot. And that's one of the things I was thinking of and wanted to ask you, even just what you're seeing globally with adoption when you go around and talk to people around the world. Because the convert the king thing is what I've kind of, I thought it would be more of like a bottom up approach, but really at the end of the day, it is convert the king. Like you said, converting, whether it's governments or sovereign wealth funds or, hedge funds, whatever it is. I mean, converting those large pools of money and helping them understand adopting Bitcoin is the smartest play for them is really where it's at, and it's going to have to be this top down, bottom up, like at the same time in a way. Right. So, but anyway, the big thing for me is, where I'm finding stuff is, a lot of it's Twitter, but then it's honestly like reading. I mean, reading is a big thing for me. It's if I current event stuff, I guess just maybe Twitter, and then the kind of just trying to triangulate the truth, maybe searching a couple different other areas just to try to verify things to your best of your ability. But I've just gone even back into first principle type of like, okay, it's got to get to reading because when it quiets your mind, as you know, and many of the listeners know, it just quiets your mind. You're more creative and just getting to base fundamental principles, because I find we've all got so caught up into the news that it does make it tough to kind of decipher what's going on. So I know it's not a great answer. Like I said, I've I have Twitter for a lot of things that are going on, and then kind of go from there, whether it's any type of media after that. Like, do you see something and trying to verify things? So it could be legacy media a little bit. It could be other news sources that are on the internet or whatever it might be. But I think the one thing, though, that I will say is that I think like Twitter lists, or like on X or whatever you want to call it, building that group of like trusted people, I think is one of the best things you can do to create a sounding board or much of an objective echo chamber as you can. So you have people that you trust that generally are right. Their predictions are generally coming true, et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of just work in that world. That really cuts down a lot of the time and people's, the credibility issues people have and just trying to decipher what's going on. That's been one of the things the last handful of years that's really helped me, at least, just building people, no matter what side they're on, but just whether it's Bitcoin or politics or whatever it is. I think that's been huge, is just, hey, who's been getting things right for years or a few years, whatever it is. That's been huge for me, I think, truly.
I love that. I just quickly pulled up my phone. I'm going to look into Twitter lists a little bit more. It's a great point.
Yeah. And the good thing is too, is like you can just look at that timeline, like I'll go to the For You timeline just to like see, cause the algorithm, is pretty good. It's pretty dang good. Like it gives you things that you might not see otherwise necessarily. But the list, it gives you like this room of people in essence that's just curated by you. And it could be your mentors. It could be, whoever, people that are trustworthy in the media or in Bitcoin or whatever. So I think that's a really important thing to just kind of make sure you're switching between those lists on your phone in that app, just so you can get a sense of what's going on. So, in saying that, we talked about traveling a little bit. I would love for you to touch on that a bit, like what you're seeing. Actually, you know what? Before that, what you touched on this earlier, and it's this thing, because I've been thinking about this a lot too. When the price hits 400, a million, 3 million a coin, whatever it is, which again, people, we've explained the ways, Luke's explained the why this can happen and will happen, because it's a finite asset and they're going to print more. End of story. That's why Bitcoin will continue going up. Aside from all the benefits to society that Bitcoin has, it will go up just from that fact alone. Can you go into why it's so important for people to just continue, like you said, getting to 1%? Because once it gets to these big numbers, it becomes very hard, even for the average millionaire, or eventually the average billionaire, to start getting sizable amounts of Bitcoin. So stacking sats is so important now, and just DCA and getting in, like you said, your education grows as you continually learn. But at some point, just keep running away from people, and if it's not your thing, then hey, so be it. But I would love for you to kind of touch on that a little bit, of just how important it is to start DCAing, start getting in now, because this will, once it starts running, all of a sudden at some point when it hits a million or whatever, you're going to have people just rushing in, and a lot of that opportunity is kind of gone.
Yeah, you gotta start early. A lot of people think, Bitcoin's at $60,000. It's gone. It's the best returns are behind it. I don't believe that's true. You're gonna be, people today are thinking, Bitcoin's $60,000. I wish I could have bought it at 6,000, so I'm not going to buy it today. I had the opportunity to buy it at 6,000. I wish I bought it at 6,000. I'm not going to buy it at 60. And when Bitcoin's at $600,000, they're going to be thinking the exact same thing about the price today. It's $60,000. They're going to say, I could have bought Bitcoin at $60,000. I feel like an idiot. Okay, so I think just admitting you're wrong and then just moving forward and saying, okay, I've been wrong for the past 10 years. I missed the best performing asset. What's the best move I can do moving forward? First, learn about Bitcoin for 10 hours. Once you've done your 10 hours in Bitcoin, then you're going to understand that you're not late. You're not wrong, okay? You were ahead of 99% of people, and you're going to be buying Bitcoin, okay? So I think, just like you say, start stacking today. It's really important. I had the same problem back in like 2018. I was like, Bitcoin's at $4,000 a coin. I had a buddy who told me about it at $1,000 a coin. I don't want to buy it, you know what I mean? But I did, okay? I sold my home. I started living in a van and a truck to stop paying rent and just buy as much Bitcoin as humanly possible for a couple of years. Because I understood what it was. Okay, I could have beat myself down and said, I'm not going to buy Bitcoin at $4,000. I missed it. I'm too late. But again, you can only do what you can do with the cards that you're dealt. Okay, you got to move forward. You can't regret the past. This is why really intelligent people like Mike Green refuse to buy Bitcoin today, because his wife told him about it when it was at $10 and he ignored her. He thought, Bitcoin's stupid. And that's why I believe he can't come around to Bitcoin today, because his wife was right about something in his realm of expertise, economics and investment. And at $10 a Bitcoin. And funny story. I heard that on a podcast. I'd love to know if that story is true or not, but it would make a lot of sense. Again, just
like Gelman amnesia. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Exactly.
That's wild.
Exactly. Buy Bitcoin today. Start buying Bitcoin today. Start saving in Bitcoin today, and just move forward. You're ahead of 99% of people, and even the last person who adopts Bitcoin, Peter Schiff, in maybe the year 2045, if he's still kicking. I hope he is. I love Peter. He's a good laugh. But even when he finally adopts Bitcoin, he's the last person on planet Earth to adopt Bitcoin. He will still be better off on a Bitcoin standard than a fiat standard, even if he is the last person to adopt it. So I think that's all that matters.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That was a beautiful way to wrap that part up before we kind of go into this last section here. It's about MicroStrategy. I want to get your thoughts on MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor here. It's the benefits of Bitcoin so far outweigh number go up, that it's the old adage in Bitcoin, I guess, the meme of, you come for the number go up, stay for the freedom, like it's just, you could be the last person in Bitcoin, but you now have incorruptible, uncensorable, permissionless money. Like you're a sovereign human being. No, the freeing aspect of that, there is not freedom out there like that other than Bitcoin, where you have this ability to own an asset, own money that the government, no one can do anything about. Your neighbor, your uncle, the brother that you don't like, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Like the corrupt politician, doesn't matter, and no one can do anything about it. That alone is priceless. And that's the thing that I think people are going to start realizing, aside from the number go up, aside from the mining and the benefits to the environment and revitalizing cities, new areas that have never been gentrified or built. I mean, it's unbelievable what Bitcoins do. So that fact alone, I love that you wrapped it up with that. In saying that, getting towards the end here, I'd love to spend a few minutes on MicroStrategy and your thoughts on, the infinite money glitch, Sailor, oh, it's not an infinite money glitch, and going into explain it. It's a big thing in the real estate world. Like the Burr method, people are familiar with the Burr method, and just, buying a house, buying a house, rehabbing the house, refinancing, renting it out, and repeating the BRRR method, Burr method. And he's doing that in essence with his business, and you can do it in business too, obviously. And he's showing that with Bitcoin. So I'd love for you to, give your thoughts on all that and what you're seeing in that world, and just even companies, small, big, adopting it going forward, and using that as their treasury strategy.
Yeah, so I think Michael Saylor has discovered the infinite money glitch, and I do think MicroStrategy could be worth over $35,000 per share, okay? People are going to lose their minds when they hear that, but you just need to understand how things work, okay? The same way there's a multiplier effect for Bitcoin, there's a multiplier effect for MicroStrategy. And this chart, looking at the MicroStrategy multiplier effect, has been floating around Twitter a lot. British Hodl did a video on this recently, saying at $1 million Bitcoin, it's very reasonable to see a $35,000 MicroStrategy, okay? And this is all because Michael Saylor has turned himself into this leveraged Bitcoin play. And like you say, he has discovered the infinite money glitch. And I genuinely believe MicroStrategy could be the most rich company, in the entire world. MicroStrategy could be worth $1 trillion. MicroStrategy could overtake Apple and Microsoft, okay? It is a genuine possibility, and Michael Saylor could be the world's richest man. So I'm really interested to see how all of this plays out over the next few years. He just announced he's going to be buying $42 billion of Bitcoin, which is ridiculous when you think about it, because right now he's squatting on $17 billion of Bitcoin. He's been smash buying Bitcoin every month with all of his company's profits for 4 years, okay? He's issued debt. He's issued shares of his company. And he's just been continually attacking the dollar and buying Bitcoin for 4 years, but he's only bought $17 billion of Bitcoin. He's just said, look, I'm going to be buying another $42 billion over the next handful of years, which is just nuts when you think about it, okay?
Permanent floor. Yeah.
Permanent floor, baby. Saylor is buying $40 million of Bitcoin every single day for the next 3 years. There's only 35 million Bitcoin mined every day. He's buying every single Bitcoin that's going to be mined over the next 1,000 days alone. And that's one billionaire. That's one of the 58,000 public companies who have said, I understand Bitcoin. I'm buying it all. I'm going to be buying it forever. Okay. Let's not forget, BlackRock's been buying $100 million of Bitcoin for the past 300 days. What happens if they continue? They're buying alone 2 or 3 days of daily Bitcoin issuance every single day. And I just don't think people have really run the numbers. And they've said, okay, billionaires, they have to be smart. What percentage of the billionaires are going to have a Michael Saylor wake-up moment and want to do the same? My money's on at least 100 of them. Out of 2,500, I don't think that's a wild assumption. I mean, people haven't run the numbers. People really haven't run the numbers. I haven't met someone who is able to refute the stupid numbers that I talk about for Bitcoin with like interesting arguments that make sense. Okay, people just have not run the numbers. There's 2,500 billionaires. There's 58,000 public companies. What if 1% of them want to do what Saylor's done? You can't. Not even 1% can do it. There's enough Bitcoin on exchanges for like 7 billionaires to do what Michael Saylor's done. 7. Run the numbers. Let's run the numbers right now. We're going to do it live on air. I want to see 7 billionaires divide by 2,500 people, 0.0028% of the world's richest people in the world, smartest people in the world. You don't become a billionaire by being dumb. 0.0028% of those people could do what Michael Saylor's done.
It's wild.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's going to infinity.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, because again, a reminder needed. There's not more coming. Like again, people are like, well, could there be some new thing, or there's more? Like, there's not going to be more Bitcoin. No one in the world is incentivized to make more Bitcoin, because that only dilutes your purchasing power. So that never will happen. And that's where people just don't understand. The only thing that can change is price. The price, the dollar price of it going up until it obliterates itself, and then Bitcoin just becomes the law of the land. It's the only thing that exists, or whatever. I mean, that's, they might be in conjunction with each other for a long time. It could be decades where they're in conjunction with each other, but at some point, Bitcoin just becomes a thing where the younger generations are like, why do we have this fiat political currency we use? Like, what's the point of this? So yeah, I couldn't agree more that, with him putting a permanent floor in, being a bank, you have BNY Mellon, like all these things going on, this will just become, the pristine collateral. More and more, this will just continue happening, like nails in the coffin to all the fiat currencies and the Bitcoin ETFs too. I mean, what are your thoughts on the Bitcoin ETFs in those terms too? And again, the best thing is to have Bitcoin in self-custody off the exchanges, but not everyone can. Obviously, there's retirement RSPs or 401ks. There's all these things that people can't necessarily just get their stuff out easily. So what's a great way? Microstrategy, the ETFs are proxies of Bitcoin. They hold the Bitcoin. They hold the keys for you, so it's not yours technically. But what are your thoughts on just the ETFs and these things tracking? That's the thing for me where I'm always like, it's just like this black box where it feels like, that's why I don't want to own them. I'd rather hold the actual Bitcoin, because it's like, I don't know if it's going to track perfectly for what the Bitcoin price is doing. So like you said, I mean, MicroStrategy can go way, way up, and probably will, but that's where I would love your thoughts on that aspect of, between the ETFs, MicroStrategy, and we know self-custody is the way, but of your own Bitcoin, your own keys. But that to me is the thing where it's like, I can't trust these things. That's why I've got to hold it. But for the people that can't, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I own 0 ETFs. Personally, I own 0 MicroStrategy. Despite it absolutely pumping, ripping, I don't own any. I'm very comfortable with Bitcoin stored in self-custody. And congratulations to those Bitcoiners who have outperformed me over the past 3 years, because if I check the MicroStrategy price right now, I believe it's up by like 200 or 300% above its 2021 peak. Just think about that for a moment. Bitcoin is like, it's nuts. It's nuts. Bitcoin is not at its all-time high. MicroStrategy is like 200 or 300% above its 2021 all-time high. So MicroStrategy, it's more than 2x its 2021 all-time high. Nearly 3x its 2021 all-time high. Which is nuts. Anyway, my thoughts, I don't trust brokerage platforms. Robinhood showed us in 2021. They can turn the buy button off when the elite are losing. When the bankers, the governments, and the elite start losing, they change the rules of the game. This is why we're Bitcoiners.
See a pattern here.
This is the first. Right.
So like the country thing, when you talk about Australia, right? Lockdowns. Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah. They changed the rules.
Yes. So, I mean, what's the Satoshi quote, right? I mean, basically paraphrasing, like the central banks, you have to trust the central banks, and all these people are going to act appropriately. And history has shown us it's full of breaches of that trust.
Yeah. So I don't even have to get conspiratorial about BlackRock. I just think if you're a Bitcoiner, you understand we've created the first form of money in 6,000 years of monetary history that has a set of rules and can't have its rules changed by rulers. It's Bitcoin. You opt out and you're accepting a new form of system. Okay. By buying Bitcoin ETFs or even MicroStrategy, you're opting out of the revolution. You're saying, I want rules again. Give me rules, daddy. Govern me harder. That's what you're saying. You're saying, okay, please give me my Bitcoin in the future if I ask for it. So I don't even need to, there's a good probability BlackRock's a honeypot. Again, I don't know anything for certain. Nothing's a certainty. Life is full of only possibilities. But I think it's higher than most people think. 10%, 20%. That maybe BlackRock's going to pull the rug one day when they're squatting on 10% of the supply. Maybe. Maybe they're going to blow up. Maybe they're working with the government to accumulate a strategic reserve for America. All of that's a probability. I don't know what numbers to assign it, 10, 20%. My probability is that, there you go. And that's all
Yeah.
that matters. If it's not zero, you shouldn't own any. Well, that's how I think about it. Again, I don't think it's as black and white as that. Let me reel that phrase back in. But yeah, I think I don't own any. They're going to pull the rug one day. So just be careful. If you don't own Bitcoin in self-custody off an exchange, it's not your Bitcoin.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So good, dude. What have you been working on lately? As we wrap here, I love your last thoughts, just everything and what you're working on. Like I said, you control a bunch of different media assets and have a lot of things you're working on, whether it's Bitcoin news, your channel. I mean, there's so much going on. What are the things you've been really working on and have you really excited right now? And where can people find you at those places?
Yeah, so if you want to tell me I'm crazy or send me some hate mail, you can find me on YouTube or Twitter. I'm all over YouTube. I've got 3 different channels. Got a nomading channel. I do the Bitcoin news YouTube channel. We do 3 videos a week over there. And then I'm trying to do 5 videos a week on my personal channel as well. So I'm making at least 10 long form videos a week. Typically live streams, 90% live streams. Just trying to encourage people about buying Bitcoin and only Bitcoin. I think the shitcoiners are kicking our asses over here on YouTube. So for the past year, I've just gone all in on Bitcoin only educational content that I think is done in a just more interesting, palatable way than the traditional Bitcoin content. Just trying to educate normies about Bitcoin. That's what I do, man. So yeah, I mean, I'm super pumped. I got a dream job. I get to talk about Bitcoin and talk shit online and get to meet incredible people like you online. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It's been an absolute blast and I look forward to the next one.
Same, brother. Mr. Luke Mikic, thank you so much for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man.
If you like that interview, then you're going to love the one that we just did with Joe Burnett, where we talk about Bitcoin being bearish at $5 million per coin. Go check that out here. Or you might want to check out the one with macro legend Tom Luongo, where he talks about the short squeeze that's going to send Bitcoin to the moon and how that's going to happen. Go check that out here. You're going to love it. Come on, see you in there.